Thank you for joining me for this episode of God Talk. And this week in God Talk, we're going to be looking at life's ups and downs. What's God's meaning and what is God's purpose in just these mountaintop experiences that we experience? But then it seems oftentimes that life is lived in some sort of valley where we have like all kinds of different trials and difficulties and so forth. Like, why is it that way? And what is God's real intention for how we live our lives? Does he want us always to be having those mountaintop experiences? Maybe you've met people like that, your motivational speakers. Oh, everything's supposed to be a mountaintop experience and you need this and you need that, or the prosperity gospel, name it and claim it. You're claiming all this like victory in life, like life is always supposed to be at this mountaintop experience. That's not real biblical. So we want to take a look at this from a biblical perspective because it's got a practical physical application and it's got a practical spiritual application, you'd say, as well. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I love the mountains. In fact, I'm convinced in my mind I would love to live permanently in the mountains. The air seems fresher. There's not a lot of people around, lots of nature. You can go hiking. You can look up at night and see the stars. I just love being in the mountains. But for as much as I love being in the mountains, it's not real practical to live in the mountains all year round. In fact, if you did, it would be kind of difficult. In the winter, mountains typically get a ton of snow. So you might be stuck in your house for half the winter, unable to back your car out of the driveway. Mountains aren't great for building things on, like to try to do like a sewer system, right? To get electricity run to places is an ordeal. Poor foundation for a house is one thing, but the infrastructure of banks and supermarkets, that's not real practical for the mountains. That's why mountains are not built upon other than some cabins and lodges and things that they can build on. So practically speaking, mountains, as great as they are, if you love mountains, are not real practical to be living in at all times. Have you ever had a mountaintop spiritual experience? When we have those, I mean, it would be nice to constantly live in that, right? And that's what the motivational speakers talk to us about. That's what the prosperity teachers talk to us about. They try to get us to buy into the fact that that is practical. That is the way that God intends it. When in fact, it's not. When we look at scripture, there's multiple people who've had mountaintop experiences. Some of them that come to my mind is, first of all, Moses is on that mountaintop that he received the 10 Commandments. And it's almost like on those mountaintops, it's almost like it's a holy area, right? You're higher in elevation, you're higher to the heavens. You feel like there's less distractions between you and God, and it's there where God reveals himself to Moses and gives him the 10 Commandments. It's also on the top of a mountain that God shows Moses the promised land that he wouldn't be allowed to enter, but he was able to see the inheritance of his people, right? The fruit of his leading them out of Egypt and journeying them through the wilderness for the last 40 years was seen from the top of a mountain. You have Elijah, and God gives Elijah this mountaintop experience because Elijah's ready to die. He's ready to give up. He is just sick and tired of, no matter what he does and how many miracles that he performs, the king and the queen are wanting to kill him. The people of Israel aren't being faithful. So God gives him this mountaintop experience. And in this mountaintop experience, he experiences God in a very real way on top of this mountain. And then you have Jesus. Jesus has a mountaintop experience. And on top of that mountain, he's up there and there's Moses and Elijah. Then there's the voice of God that calls out, this is my son with whom I am well pleased. So you have all of these mountaintop experiences. And what's interesting, we can only assume Moses didn't want to come down after receiving the 10 Commandments. We can only assume Elijah didn't want to either after he hears God in the gentle whisper. We hear Peter's reaction because when Jesus has his mountaintop experience with Moses and Elijah and God the Father, Peter's there as well as a couple others. But Peter's response is, Lord, it is good for us to be here. Let's build 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah. Like, we'll sleep outside on the ground. But you can have your own place to stay, and so can Moses and Elijah. It was good for them to be there, but it wasn't good for them to stay there. So they came down off of the mountain and obviously had to go back into the valley, right? For as good as the mountaintop experience is to be there, we're not called to stay there in those places. In fact, those mountaintop experiences, they're meant for us, but they're meant for us for a reason. And if you think about it, for Moses receiving the 10 Commandments, that mountaintop experience was really to give him the strength for all the crap he was going to have to deal with and all the complaining from the Israelites for the 40 years of wandering. For Elijah, it was needed because, listen, he wanted to die. He wanted to give up. He was sick of this world. He just wanted God to take him to heaven. But that mountaintop experience gave him what he needed so that he could finish his ministry and that he could deal with the death threats of the king and queen who were trying to kill him. And for Jesus, that mountaintop experience, it was an amazing experience, but ultimately to prepare him for his death and his resurrection that was still to come. So you see, these mountaintop experiences are to prepare us for where life is normally lived, and that is in the valley. So you have to ignore these motivational speakers and these name it and claim it prosperity gospel preachers. Life is not designed by God to be lived in the mountains. It's good for us to be there. It's good when he gives us those experiences, but life happens mostly in the valley, and life is lived as we live it between the two mountains, our one mountaintop experience and maybe another. And it might be separated by 5 years. It might be separated by 20 years. Maybe we only have one in our whole life, but sometimes there's multiple ones. But you have to see, even in the Bible, like as I'm reading some of these mountaintop experiences or other experiences that are where people get amazingly close to God and it's not on a mountain, that doesn't happen every day. It doesn't happen every other day. It doesn't happen every year. It may not happen for 20, 30, 40. Maybe there's 100 and 150-year gap in scripture between where it mentions one and mentions another. So there's this perception that mountains are going on all the time. They're not. They're rare. And when we receive them, they're to prepare us so that we are able to live in the valley. Have you ever had a mountaintop experience? Like they can be experienced in a variety of ways. Maybe it's some worship service where you finally really just feel the presence of God come upon you in a very real way, right? I remember I was in high school and we had a youth gathering in Red Rocks, which I believe is I mean, it's in Colorado, but I believe in the Denver area. And when we're up there, a thunderstorm came in, a severe thunderstorm, and it dropped the temperatures from like the 80s to like, I don't know, 40s to 50. It's kind of up in the mountains, right? And so it got really cold. It poured, it lightning, it hailed. It made the news at that time because they had to rush all these kids out. Like, I don't know if there's 10,000 of us or 15, 20,000 of us. It was a big gathering of students. Some people that had to be taken to the hospital because they had hypothermia. And I remember being in the midst of all that. And I remember, like, for me, it didn't feel that bad, right? Maybe partly because I grew up in New York, and though I hadn't been there for many years during the winter, it just wasn't that cold. But also, people just like to freak out, and when you freak out, you make everything worse. And so I just kept allowing other students to go ahead of me as they would evacuate people off of that mountain. I caught one of the last buses. I can't even remember what time I got back to the hotel that my group was already at, but I was chilled to the bone. I mean, I was soaking wet that entire time. And it was like, I don't remember the temperature. It was cold, 40s or 50s. And I remember just taking like a really long hot shower when I got back to try to warm up. But that whole experience, like it was an amazing experience worship wise. And it was also kind of an amazing experience to just kind of be communing there with God in the midst of this very kind of difficult trial and tribulation that everyone's going through, and feeling the presence of God and trying to do good deeds by letting the other kids go before me. Like all of this just had a very positive impact on me. So that was literally a mountaintop experience in the mountains. We have other mountaintop experiences, right? Some of us have experienced healing in our lives or the healing in loved ones' lives. That can be a mountaintop. experience. Maybe some of us have heard God speak to us. Maybe we've heard him speak to us through our pastor, maybe like through the word, through advice that friends give. Maybe we've heard just the Holy Spirit very strongly speak to us in a way that we know it's God guiding us and God speaking to us. Maybe we've just witnessed a miracle in our life, wonders and signs. Like these are all mountaintop experiences when we experience them, but we know they don't happen every day, right? Maybe you've experienced one in your life. Maybe you've experienced a dozen, but even so, like that's a dozen over the whole course of your life. But God gives us these, not that we can remain in them. Like these are spiritual highs, and thank God that He does give them, but they're to prepare us for things. Just like for Jesus, it was to prepare him for his pending death. For Moses, the drudgery of 40 years of wandering in the desert. Elijah having the king and the queen of the land trying to seek you out and kill you. Like these things are given to prepare us for the difficulties that we find in the valley. I'm recording this on Wednesday. It's probably going to be dropped tomorrow on Thursday, but yesterday, so Tuesday, I got to experience the valley in a few different situations. I had a good friend of mine said that he needed to talk, and so I gave him a call, and he shared with me just some real difficulties that he's going through with his wife. He was on a trip and a working business trip, you might call it. And while he was driving back, his wife called and basically said, like, she can't do this anymore. She's done. Basically, after she got done kind of venting everything, hung up on him, blocked her number. Um, she's now in another city, doesn't even know where she's living. He didn't know where any of this was coming from. When he got home, she had left him notes on how to take care of this, and that, all these different things she was managing, but he had no idea it was coming. He not only had no idea it was coming, once it was brought to him, he didn't have a chance to address it. He didn't have a chance to fix it. That's what he's living in right now. And this is like, he shares this with me yesterday, and I'm just spending time just kind of listening to him, trying to help him process through it, trying to give him some advice, encouraging him that I would be praying for him. Like, that is a huge valley. If you've ever been in a relationship breakup, I mean, in many respects, that's some of the worst things that you go through. Oftentimes, a divorce is worse than having your spouse die. Now, I have a friend that has experienced that on both sides. I had shared that before he had. I'd shared that after his spouse died, and he really kind of dismissed it, and I think almost found it as an insensitive comment. But when he experienced it on the other side, I think he saw a lot of truth in it, because when someone dies, you don't feel responsibility in that. You can't control that, and they're gone, and you can't do anything about it. Someone chooses to leave you. There's like, what could I have done different? And then that person's still around, and you still have to sometimes come in contact with that person, especially if you have kids with them. So, like, when they're dead, they're gone. But when they're still around, you still are reminded of all that pain and suffering, and you have to deal with them on a regular basis. Those are huge valleys, right? If we have a loved one pass away, or if we go through divorce. So, talking with a buddy of mine, and this is fresh and it's raw, and he is in a major valley. Well, later on that day, I was getting together with another friend who is going through a very similar thing, just a little bit further along, and just spent a lot of time just kind of talking about what that's looking like, how that's feeling, what's working, what's not, how is God speaking to them in the midst of the valley that they've been in for quite some time now. And then as I was going down the expressway, and here in Texas, the expressway is like 2 lanes, concrete barrier on both sides. If something goes wrong on the expressway, many years ago, there was an ice storm, and cars were spinning out, and it was just a kill zone, because all these semis were coming, hitting these cars. Like there's no way to escape. There's no way to get off. Like these expressways are literally are kill zones when something goes wrong. Well, there was a slowdown of traffic on the expressway of like 15 cars. So it wasn't really bad, but it was unusual. So I knew something was going on up here. And as I get up closer, I see a semi. I see something that's unrecognizable, which turns out to be a vehicle. And then I see another like pickup truck. that's pulled ahead of it. And as I'm passing this at a very slow rate, this is something that just had happened a minute or two before, and I realized this is a car that's not recognizable. And as I'm driving by, I'm like, this just happened. There's no fire trucks here. There's no ambulance here, like nothing. And backup wasn't long enough that this had gone on for a while at all. And I'm watching the reactions of the people that are outside, like they're just pacing and distraught. I'm like, they're, and I'm passing within like a foot or two. Like it's two lanes, it's concrete barriers on both sides, and then two lanes. So in the right lane is where the accident took place. And I'm thinking in this unrecognizable mesh of metal, there's got to be a dead person in it because like there's no way you can survive what I'm seeing. And sure enough, as I'm driving, I look and I see like open to the air inside this mash of metal, two legs uh, pointed towards me as I'm passing it. I see a skirt. And so basically, I'm seeing from the knees up through the waist area, in just this black dress. If I remember right, it had like black or white polka dots on it, and two legs that were still very flesh colored. Like this is how recent it was. Like I knew that person was dead. I was looking at a dead person's body on the side of the road as I passed. But so freshly happened that there's not a traffic backup yet, really to speak of, and there's no emergency personnel there at all. It took me like almost a day to figure out how was I seen in the vehicle like that. What I think had happened is the semi or its load had smashed the top of the vehicle so that the top of the vehicle folded down on this individual. It turns out there's two individuals in there. Both died instantly. I could only see one, but the top of the car just flattened down on it. So really, from the dash to the top of the windshield, that became like the window into the car, and that's where I was seeing either the driver or the passenger's body from basically the knees up to the waist. Like I've seen dead people in hospitals before, like when they pull the plug and stuff like that. But I've never seen someone dead in an uncontrolled environment on the side of the road. For those of you who've been military, law enforcement, medical professionals, you've experienced some of it, but I don't know that you ever get used to it. Anyways, like it was horrific to see. And I just think about like the valley when that young lady and another lady that was in the car with her that were killed instantly, like when they got dressed that morning, they didn't realize they were putting on like clothes for the last time. This was like around 12:30, so they're probably going to lunch or coming back from lunch. When they decided they were going to run out and just grab a bite to eat, they didn't realize they were never going to make it and that their life was going to end. And so the people, their loved ones, get a call, I don't know, a little after lunch. By the way, you thought your wife, your girlfriend, whoever, your daughter was at work. Well, she was killed in a traffic accident because probably decided to go get a bite to eat at lunch. Man, life's got valleys. It's got lots of valleys. And sometimes we see them coming and you can't do anything about it. Sometimes you see them coming and you can mitigate it a little bit, right? But it's still a valley. And then sometimes you don't ever see it coming. And for them, like I don't know how much time that they had from when that event started to when it ended, but they didn't have long. And they were gone before they knew it. They were in the eternity before they knew it. All of us in here are going to experience mountains from time to time. But what you need to understand is that those mountains are really to prepare us for those valleys because the valleys are coming, whether you like it or not. Life is lived primarily in the valley. But as we're in the valley, we have to remember those mountaintop experiences because those mountains on either side will get us through the valley that is in the middle. Maybe you're in a mountaintop moment in your life right now. And man, it is good for you to be there. I hope you can stay there for a while, but you're not meant to live there and you won't live there. It's good that you're there, but you're not going to stay there. And if you're in a valley, then what you need to do is remember like the God who was faithful before and gave you that mountaintop experience before, that God is still with you in the valley. He gave you that mountaintop experience so that you can get through the valley until he gets you to that other mountaintop experience on the other side. And if you live long enough, there'll be another valley. And if God's gracious enough, maybe another mountaintop experience. But when you're in the valley and when you get that horrible news, like your daughter, your wife, your spouse is killed in a car accident like that, or that you lose your job, don't forget the God of the mountains, because the God of the mountains is still the God of the valley. And the reason he gave you the mountaintop is so that you could be certain he's still with you in the valley. Thank you for joining me for this episode of God Talk, and I look forward to talking to you again next time. God bless.